high-resolution sculpting engine inside of Blender allows us to go in and add some wonderful details on the interior of our model itself. Being able to place details that are localized to the surfaces underneath with either our simple sculpting tools in combination with the masking engine is just really great. We can ensure that the details match the areas that they're being stamped onto or they're being placed onto. However, on the back here, I want a lot of information that to kind of fill in and flood this portion of my mesh, and I don't necessarily want to do it by hand. One of the fastest ways to get believable results is to incorporate real photographs into our sculpting workflow, and that's what this video is going to explore, how to use two-dimensional images underneath, if you will, our brush tip, which is pretty cool. So we're going to be brushing down photographs versus brushing down strokes. Let's go ahead and start the process. It all begins with this texture icon way down over here inside of our tool properties. And this will allow us to import a texture in and then apply and use that underneath our brush tip. Let's go ahead and do it. We're going to create a new texture slot by hitting the new button. And then once this loads, we're going to be able to go in and give it a good name and then import an image inside of that entire area. Let's do it real fast. Let's just call this, I don't know, turtle skin. There we go. Now let's load in an image by hitting the open button and navigate to our computer where we've saved some images. Now I've already saved some. These are what we're looking for here. These are alpha textures. They're two-dimensional images. They're photographs that have been adjusted in Photoshop or any other image editing application to make them black and white. Where the parts of the image that are white, the tool is going to push our polygons outward. And where it's black, the tool is not going to have any influence. It is, in every sense, an interactive brush space mask for our sculpting tools, which is pretty cool. Now, I have a couple of them in here, and as you can see, they have some pretty cool patterns that we're going to be putting down inside of my turtles. You can do some very simple research online and find thousands and thousands and thousands of these alpha textures for our sculpting workflow. A lot of sculpting tools use these alphas to produce high-quality results, and we're going to be doing the same, so they're really easy to find. I think I want to work with this one. It's a pretty easy shape to see. It's a defined pattern, and it'll make it real easy to see how the tools work on our mesh, and then we'll load in some other ones to start having some fun. Let's go ahead and load this one in. I'm going to change the color space to non-color so the computer only looks at the black and white values in the image and doesn't interpret them accidentally as color images. With the image loaded in, let's return to our tool properties. I still got my Sculpt Draw brush active, and Blender's already loaded the imported texture underneath my brush, but if it hasn't for you, just make sure you click in this area, and it'll bring up open a small library of textures that are available to you inside of the scene. I did this a couple times before, so I have some other texture slots in here. If this is the first time you're doing it, you'll only have one, and I'm going to access it by clicking on it. So how this works, now that we have a texture loaded into the brush, is that it's going to use the radius of our brush to determine how big or how small that information is going to be. Now, the default values, and let me just reduce my spacing values here a little bit. There we go. This is what it looks like under its default values. Cool, huh? Now we're stamping down this pattern. We're sculpting this pattern into the model itself, and that's pretty cool. We don't get a lot of control with the default properties. The mapping value here under the texture settings is set to tiled, and what that's doing can easily be seen if we go into the cursor values and turn on the texture opacity, and now we can see how this tiled texture is working inside the scene itself. It's tiling that two-dimensional texture across our viewport display, and then we're able to access that tiled information when we brush. Now, this is neat, and in some situations this is a great place to go, but we're going to change the way the tool works to get a little bit more of an interactive result. Let me turn the visibility of our texture opacity back off under the cursor values and make a few small changes to the mapping and to the stroke method. The first thing that we want to do under the mapping pull-down menu is change it to area plane. That way, as the brush changes its orientation across the model, so will the texture. It's going to keep it's going to keep the curvature of the brush head and the texture that's being projected across the brush head in alignment with each other. So this is going to give you the best result. We're not going to see any sort of texture stretching when we use area plane. The other thing that we want to change is the stroke method. And specifically, there's a couple choices that we have. Anchored is going to give you the most control, because watch what happens. When we're using the anchored stroke method, now we get to left click and drag and determine where we want this object to be and its rotation. Now the quality of the mesh and the density of the polygons is going to determine the quality of the image as it's being reproduced on the model itself. And you can see we get some really cool results when we get this anchored. Another great choice is to go to drag dot. Now, drag dot has a relationship between the size of the brush and the size of the texture. So at the very least, we get to drag that image around and place it on our mesh. Pretty cool. If we were to make the brush bigger, the texture also gets bigger, and we're going to have a much different result. Now, this texture is not exactly what I want to use to detail my model. It's looking like it's grown some kind of funky armor on the backside of it, but that's okay. However, I do want to spend some time maybe looking at ways that I can detail this part of my leg. I don't want to use this one, so let's use a different texture. Let's add in a new texture slot, and then we're going to import in another Photoshop document, another alpha channel, another alpha texture, that we can use to very quickly produce some wonderful, wonderful details inside of the scene itself. Let's do it real fast. I'm going to load in. A new. Right here. Whenever you create a new one after the first one, it kind of takes the properties of the previous one as the foundation for the next new texture. I'm going to load in a new image here, and let's do this one. This one might be a fun one. Yeah, it's still non-color, which is what we like. It's called Turtle Skin 3. If we go back into our brush properties, let's load there it is, Turtle Skin 3 into the mix, and see how we can take advantage of its really great texture details inside of this area of my mesh. Okay, so I've changed my stroke method back to anchored, and now when I pull it out, I can start creating some really neat details inside the scene. Now, I want you to look very carefully at how all this information has been projected down into the scene itself. If you notice, it's really high here in the center, and then the height of the bumps kind of fade off across the surface of the mesh. That's not exactly what I want. In addition, we can also change the strength value of the brush itself to determine the height. So we have two challenges that we need to overcome. I want the height of these things to be pretty uniform, and it's too high to begin with. Yeah, something like that is a little bit better. So lowering the strength is giving me a good result. The other thing that I want to look at is playing around with the fall off of the texture itself. That's going to, right now, let's put the strength back up a little bit. It was really easy to see a second ago. Right now, the strength of this texture is really intense here at the center of the object, and then it fades off. That has everything to do with the fall off of the texture itself. The default is this smooth fall off preset, which is a good place to go. That gives us that nice kind of blending effect. However, it makes it really intense in the center, and then it fades off towards the outside. If that doesn't work for you, another thing that we could do is do constant. Now, constant, as one might imagine, is not going to have that fading effect. Of course, the quality of the resolution of the mesh over here is pretty small at the moment. Let's hit the undo key, get rid of this section. With the fall off set to constant, you're going to see that we're not going to get that fading of the texture across the brush itself. Yeah, we're still getting a little bit of stretching, but it's still pretty good. Yeah, not so bad. I like that. Now, what I would do in a moment like this is that I'm going to go in and I'm going to start layering in some details in here. I like this little dotty pattern. It kind of goes with the leg shapes that I've created before. And I'm going to lower the strength of this pretty significantly. I'm going to bring in some information. Now, you're free go above and start to cross into this other area, that's fine. Just be aware that you are in fact doing it. One of the reasons we like doing these types of details with sculpted geometry is that we can continue to sculpt on top of this to get the result that we're after. There we go. That's pretty good. Let's add in one more texture here because we can layer this in as much as we want because we have these dot patterns, and then we're going to layer in some wonderful crocodile skin texture to get that leathery kind of feel. Let's do it. I'm going to import in, let's do this one. Looks like elephant skin, which is pretty cool. We'll return to our brush and make sure that texture is loaded in underneath my cursor. All right, so let's see how it changes things now. Yeah, now we're getting some of that really great skin texture showing up in the mesh itself. Now you want to use this kind of sparingly. We don't want to put it all over the place. And a hybrid approach is really kind of the best one because now we can go in and start adding this wonderful illusion of detail. With textures where there's a lot of wrinkles in there, be mindful of the flow of the shapes in relationship to the mesh itself. Also, don't be afraid to mask out some details that you don't want to have influenced. You can use the total sum of the entire Blender sculpting engine to get the result that you're after. For example, maybe I want to have some details down here at the bottom, but I don't want them to go on the inside of this cool little armor plating that I made before. Well, that's okay, because now I can go back to the brush. I can put it in there. See how it doesn't go inside the mask? It's pretty cool. Pretty neat. I like that a lot. So inside of the Blender sculpting engine, we have the ability to use our high-resolution sculpting tools to customize and create localized data. That gives us some really great primary shapes. But we can also incorporate two-dimensional alpha textures inside of our sculpting workflow to flood and fill large swaths of our model with this wonderful high-resolution digital imagery.